It began at the end of the First Dark Age, during the first resurgence in early August 2019. A player called Creeks would start his faction in the Kansas-Nebraska region, and although he was just one man, he would go on a pillaging spree and loot every major faction that was active on the server at that time. He would amass the largest treasure trove the server had ever known, and did it all on his own, relying on his wits and cunning to even the odds against overwhelming force. Shortly before August 23rd, Creeks claimed his railroad that extended all the way to the eastern North American coastline. Many of the eastern North American factions took issue with this and began correspondence with Creeks to remove the claim. For whatever reason, negotiations failed, and the Eastern American nations resorted to war in order to force the removal of the claim. The foremost of these factions in this initial assault was the Communist Union of Carolina, abbreviated to CUC, led by a Y. It was the largest North American faction by player count, and this likely factored into the quick escalation into war against the one-man, unknown faction 90K. On August 23, 2019, Cook and its ally Snowland conducted a joint assault on the 90K base. Creeks recorded the events in his memoir as follows.
I first joined the server early August. I played normally at first. I took over an old base and no one knew who I was. I got tired of that. I wanted people to know who I was. I decided to make a railroad stretching from 90K to the east coast of the United States. This railroad, quote, blocked, end quote, multiple factions and they got angry with me. Cook sent me a message, quote, unclaim part of the railroad or we war you. At first I agreed to unclaim, then after thinking about it I said, quote, fuck it, lol, war me, end quote. And they did. All of Cook came to 90K's base and I killed every single one of them. Know that I knew they kinda sucked at PvP. I went to their base and killed them over and over again.
The reaction to these events was a show of support by other nations who were a part of the largest faction coalition, led by Britannia named the Grand Alliance, abbreviated to the GA, which Cook was also a member of. However, after the failed assault, tension erupted between Cook and its ally Snowland, which led to a civil war in Cook. More on this in a future episode. In the week following the initial assault, Chatmon Chasing Jolton, referred to as Jolt, who was the leader of the faction called Mayoria, located in North New Zealand, found his way into the 90K base and attempted to force Creeks into combat. The memoir records,
Chatmon Jolt. Jolt does not like me one bit. Jolt spends his days waiting for me to come online and sits inside my base so he can kill me. He hasn't so far, fingers crossed. After realizing Jolt spends his time at my base, I paid his base a visit. While he was waiting for Blocky Bulbo, or Creeks to have home, I lured creepers onto his exposed shulker boxes. I got about 20. I did this while invisible to hide from the Dina map and he had no idea what hit him. Later the next day he realized what happened and accused my account Creeks, which was 100% correct even though I was invisible the entire time and made sure to never be in the area where he could see me. Good guess, Jolt.
After this, Creeks went on to successfully raid other factions, drawing more combatants onto the side of the Grand Alliance, which had by this time labeled Creeks an international terrorist. Creeks went on to loot Tyrell Corp, Emperor Romano, Britannia, and the People's Holy Theocracy of Siberia. Something important to note is that while Kranerja was the leader of Emperor Romano and was allied with Creeks, Creeks still managed to pull a fast one on him and inside raid him with an account called Yellow Knife. The memoir accounts for this.
I had gotten my account Yellow Knife invited into a gold mine of loot, Emperor Romano. After raiding Terrell Corp I quickly logged into Yellow Knife to inside raid the Romans. It didn't take long. I stole upwards of 60 shulkers from one spot. The best loot fit into 4 shulkers. Each was entirely with either swords or a piece of armor. These 4 shulkers were full of protection for mending armor and sharp 4 to 5 swords. If you doubt me, ask Impero, they'll say it's true. Next I moved on to Impero's main base. Now this was a bit of a problem. They made the chunks holding their chests accessed by officers and up only. I was not an officer. I could not build in these chunks or open the chests. So how did I steal their stuff? Well, I bombed the house. Yep, I literally made a tower, put a TNT minecart on top and pushed it off. Since I was so far up, the TNT minecart had enough time to move forward into the excess chunks and then blew up. It took 5 or so of these to break into the chest room. To be honest, the loot was okay, nothing to write home about. I got a lot of spawners though. I probably took 25 blaze spawners. As I write this book, Kranerja, Emperor Romano's leader, has just realized they were raided. He blames the owner Woozer. Everyone is telling him he got incited and he refuses to believe it. You wanna know the best part? Gold said to him, and I quote,
"You know someone has been online recently from your faction? His name is Yellowknife."
Kranerja just said, quote,
He didn't have access to those chunks. It couldn't have been him.
Jolt, I know you don't like me, but you're easily the smartest person I have seen on this server. So that's all as of now. Multiple factions are now pissed at 90k. My base is being camped, and attempts to raid have been made. I've moved all my loot to an undisclosed location, so even if every 90k chest is broken, you won't get anything.
After this, Creeks went on to inside raid Britannia. The memoir continues.
Well, that didn't last long. The same day I incited the Romans, I incited Britannia. August 30th, 2019. On my account Hominy, I placed an item stolen from Paris Labrador inside another new recruit's chest. Let's see if the framing works. Yeah, it didn't work. Turns out Jim just abuses his admin powers for people on this server. They had him /inspect a chest to figure out it was me. I'm writing this from the next day. Today Jim used creeper eggs on my claimed faction base because he wanted to help Osmer kill me. He denies it happened, but he knows it's true.
On August 31st, a much larger joint assault was carried out against 90k by the Texan Empire, Nevada, Britannia, Mayora, and myself. From what I recall from the raid, most of the GA forces were unable to penetrate the underground portion of the base for some time. Gold was engaging Creeks deep within the base trying to slay him, but Creeks had the home field advantage and would retreat behind a door that Jolt could not open in order to heal. Gold needed to keep him combat tagged until the rest of the GA forces could find a way into the lower portions using chorus fluid. As the fight went on, some GA fighters made their way into the underground sections, but they weren't prepared for the many traps that lay in wait for them. And unknown to the Grand Alliance, Creeks had formed a temporary alliance with Kranerja, the leader of Emperor Romano and an exceptional PvPer who had beaten every faction in a great war the previous month. The mere presence of Kranerja was a big drain on morale. When he was unbanned, many had hoped he would fight against Creeks, especially since Creeks had inside raided his faction. And the two did fight initially, resulting in Kranerja slaying Creeks. However, Creeks and Kranerja had hopped into a voice call after the fight and settled their differences. Although Creeks had profited greatly from looting them, acquiring many sets of god armor and spawners, the Romans, quote, didn't need it, end quote, and accepted the loss as insignificant. Once a portion of the GA members had committed to the underground, Kranerja announced his presence slaying Slotpack, Epicwide, and others. Between the traps, lesser experience, and broken cohesion, the Grand Alliance was forced to retreat, but not without a few casualties. I don't remember how many were killed that day, but amidst the chaos, I managed to claw the collection hoppers and some of the traps with boats and recover some of the precious gear that would have been lost. Ultimately, the mission failed and was a victory for 90k. After this raid, more attempts were made to breach the 90k chest room with TNT cannons and TNT minecarts. The problem was mob grinders on the server had already severely reduced the number of hostile mob spawns, and there were no gunpowder farms present at the time. The result was an extreme scarcity of gunpowder, which would make the use of explosives in raids limited for most of the lifespan of the server. More complicated TNT cannons would be tried, but previously during the Austro-Mayora War, it had been discovered that the anti-cheat plugin for the server would prevent dispensers from functioning normally when engineers from Arcana attempted to wipe Mayora off the map. Although the limited gunpowder made it difficult, Jessing Jolton managed to navigate TNT minecarts into the base and cause damage to the surface buildings. However, after this raid, 90k erected water defenses around the base and other critical buildings. After these series of raids, all nations of the GA redoubled their efforts to take 90k out. More raids were launched against the faction, and the 90K base was in a near-constant state of siege. 90K bolstered its defenses by encapsulating its entire surface base in a cobblestone box and covering the entire structure in water. On September 7th, an officer of Britannia called Paris Labrador would engage in a skirmish with Creeks in western Algeria. His recollection is as follows.
We fought in western Algeria. He had just attempted to loot our colony in the West Sahara. At the time, this was where we kept our villagers since it was a little more low-key than our bunker, which was used by allied factions. Unfortunately, he found and killed them all. I caught him there luring a creeper, and when he saw me, he ran, ender-pearling for hundreds of blocks. I finally caught up to him and we fought. I had the advantage in armor durability. But the anti-cheat started acting up, and he managed to kill me.
On September 12th, another major raid by the GA forces was launched, but ultimately achieved nothing. The memoir continues.
It's been a while. It's September 27th now. We've just been AFKing pretty much. I inside raided PHTS, but I got caught in the middle. I still stole all of Jack's gear, including his precious books, so it's whatever, I guess. I'm planning to TNT minecart some Britannia chests, specifically Paris's soon. We'll see how that goes. Oh, and also on September 27th I claimed Patagonia's base and stole all their loot. Pretty okay amount of gear, actually.
This ends the memoir by Creeks, signed by the server administrator Woozer for authentication. At this point in the conflict, it was becoming clear that Creeks would stick to his guerrilla tactics and that a decisive victory would not be possible. The conflict would continue, but the massive joint raids would slow down and become much more limited in scope. On October 4th, Creeks was permanently banned by server staff for alleged Elytra hacks. When he realized his ban would not be appealed, he took to Discord to say a few parting words to the community. He expressed his enjoyment of the server and his disappointment at how his time there would end. He wished to return the book collection he had stolen from me, with his memoir included. But he had looted so much from the server that he could not remember where it was stashed, and his book ended up on display in the admin faction for many months, making it impossible to read. And so, with dismay that no one would ever get the full story of his exploits, and a bittersweet sense of satisfaction for his accomplishments, he left Geocraft behind, never to be heard from again. After 90K disbanded some 10 to 20 days later, many players, myself included, picked through the ruins hoping to find the massive amount of wealth Creeks had accumulated. The search was mostly in vain, as he only kept a minimal amount of valuable items at the base. The player Lord Lyle, the leader of 90K's neighbor Kansas, claimed the ruins and tunneled around the base for days until later selling the ruins to Cook, which had resolved its domestic conflict and reformed into the United States. Others tried searching for the great treasure of 90K, but all eventually gave up on finding it, and the server eventually moved on. That is, until months later, I was exploring a small island in the southwest Pacific, and made the discovery that would make my faction, the People's Holy Theocracy of Siberia, the wealthiest faction ever on Geocraft. But that's a story for another time. Thank you for watching. There are many more stories yet to tell. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe. If you wish to contribute to this series, reach out to me on Discord. Information below. Until next time.